Yes.
Okay, great.
Cool. Cool. Thanks.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the first of the many sessions that are going to be had today for the SSDC Copenhagen EUDC training day. We are Cal and Callum, and we're going to be talking to you today about actor analysis. So let's get started. So just a quick introduction to who we are, just so you know that we at least have some sense of what we're talking about. We've both done various trainings for our societies. I was the Edinburgh Workshop Coordinator from 21 to 22. Cal, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so this is my second, maybe third, yeah, I think third year being involved running Aberdeen trainings. Generally speaking, we do them quite communally. I've done a lot of workshops myself, and I've been involved in other people's workshops, so I have somewhat of an idea of what I'm talking about, hopefully.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about actor analysis. The goal of this is ultimately to build your confidence engaging in actor analysis, either in explicitly actor motions or just kind of generally when actors come up, because they are generally pretty common across debating. We have two games planned. They're not really games, they're just kind of interactive sessions. For those of you who are watching back on the SSDC YouTube channel, we will have paused the recording just to let everybody feel comfortable. So don't worry, none of the game sessions are going to be recorded in any way, shape, or form. Cool. So what is actor analysis? So an actor is ultimately just any person who's able to take an independent action. We have a lot of examples here. They can really be broad. I know, Cal, you talk a lot about IR in this, so I'm happy for you to jump in at any point.
Yeah, no, sure. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so an actor is just anything or anyone that can do anything, which definitely isn't too broad and too vague at all. But in all seriousness, it can be politicians, it can be individuals in life, if the motion is about social life or just generally like an individual pursuing a parenting scheme or like a lifestyle choice. It can be a political party or an entity like the Labour Party or the civil service or something like that. It can be a movement, so it can be the feminist movement, it can be the queer movement, that kind of thing. It can also just be like anything slightly specific. So this example is the University Scholarship Fund targeted at marginalized identity groups, but it can just be really anything that can do anything and have its own incentives. But the important thing is an actor is not a stakeholder. So in the glorious example of this house with Banzoos, animals are a stakeholder. We're not necessarily an actor because they don't have agency. They can't really do their own thing, regardless of emotion. And it's important in every single debate you'll do, generally speaking, you'll have to do the tiniest little bit of here is a thing or a person, here's how it is likely to act, depending on what happens within the motion, or generally speaking, regardless of the motion. So yeah, no, it's important every single round you'll do, at very least to be thinking about it, but obviously some more important than others.
Yeah, and as we say, some more important than the others. Actor analysis motions are clearly the most important ones. At that point, you will have to think very explicitly about the specific actor that you've been given. So if it's this house as a university scholarship fund targeted at marginalized identity groups, you have to think about what that fund is going to want, what that fund is able to do, and why that fund wants to do the things that it can do. But we'll get into all of that later in the workshop. So. We're going to do a game time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing for a second. If I just go, or you know what? I'm not going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop the recording like that. Section. Cool. So, Cal, do you want to take these next few slides and I'll chime in if you're like
Yeah,
to type.
sure. So again, just do the opposite, just hop in on the other way. So the first thing here is about identifying actors within any given motion. This is quite easy if the motion isn't actor motion. So this house as X would do something. So I don't know, this house as a parent would raise their child as a stoic. If the motion is not an actor motion, you need to start like dissecting it during prep time with your partner, start asking some key questions. So who has agency under the status quo? That did say who can kind of do their own thing, who isn't bound to any other body. So obviously we talked earlier about this house with ban zoos. I think animals don't have agency under the status quo, but I think people visiting the zoos probably do, right? Who would granted agency following this change? So again, back to animals and their zoos. I think if you ban zoos, they'd probably be given agency, but they don't have agency under the status quo. And who's likely to change their behavior based on this motion? So the easiest example here is anything to do with econ, where it's do we like free market or government intervention? I think that companies are likely to change how they act depending on what side of the motion you're on. And I also think that various people who would otherwise invest in the economy are likely to do the same. So it's just about identifying actors like that, asking yourself about that. So there's a couple of things you need to think about. The first of which is physical capacity in terms of can they actually do anything, right? So sure, some concepts could be actors, but in reality, they can't act, and therefore it's very unlikely that they are people you should be doing actor analysis for. So I think it would be pretty unreasonable to be like a baby or my dog are actually an actor and then do a bunch of analysis as if they're likely to act depending on whether or not zoos are banned or we intervened in the economy. That is also the case for, generally speaking, less wealthy people in an econ motion. I think it's unfair to be like, they spend all their money doing X or Y thing, and that's good or bad. So it's just about being like rational. Can they actually do anything? And will this have any impacts in the motion whatsoever? The second thing is social capacity. So are we bound by norms and do we have power? So this is just basic things like in a political party, the leader probably has to believe or say X thing, even if they personally don't believe it. If the rest of the party do believe it, they still have to kind of advocate for it. This can also be countries in terms of we have lots of treaties and stuff which countries sign on to, which determine their behavior. It means they can or they have to or they can't do certain things like send aid to foreign countries or start wars. So it's just about, are they bound by anything or anyone? And there's also employees, because when you're at your job, you probably can't really, swear or talk about your own political beliefs or smoke or whatever, which is, evil. So it's just about, do you have any power to do anything, regardless of whether or not you have the agency to do it? And the final one is cognitive capacity. So is an actor even aware of a power? So when it comes to collective action or motions about strikes or motions about trade unions, I think in a lot of cases, trade unions are probably more powerful than they think they are. And the average person, part of a labor movement, is probably more powerful than they think they are. But generally speaking, they're unlikely to act on this because they don't have the cognitive capacity. And this can apply for a couple of other things as well, such as, I don't know, even things like firefighters and stuff, I guess. They probably do a lot, but they're not really aware of their power.
Yeah, and I think the thing to remember, though, is that there's a lot of nuance within these ideas. So going back to the economic capital one, obviously those who have less wealth and have less economic capital are constrained in the actions they can take, but they can still take some actions. You might not be able to go to the grocery store and buy whatever you want. There are certainly choices that you can make. So the thing that's important when you're identifying which actors you want to focus on and which actors are crucial is thinking about where the debate is taking place and kind of thinking about the degree to which any of these things do constrain their activity. These are kind of really like these are obviously taking very broad and very unnuanced looks, but remember within debates you should be try and be as nuanced as possible with how any of these three things affect actors. So clearly one example that kind of brings all of these. It may be the case that Cal wishes to remove me as the co-training officer and act alone. So he wishes to kind of take this action to be an actor. However, there are certain restraints that Cal has on his action. So he needs a majority of SSDC members to agree. I would hope that he doesn't have that. It's kind of seen as being like it would be kind of a bad thing to do, a kind of mean thing to do, and probably cause a bit of backlash on him. And I think Cal is probably sensitive to how people feel about him. And he just probably doesn't know the constitutional mechanism in order to actually remove me as the individual. So I think these are kind of important ways to think about if an actor is able to act, because maybe as a result of this, Cal might want to be an actor, he might want to take this action, but he's just unable to do so within the status quo that exists currently. So, yeah, Cal?
So in terms of you've got your actors, you've got me, you've got your less economically advantaged people. Now you need to identify what they want, which is their desires. This is important because it helps you develop like sort of a thinking line of how they're going to respond to the world around them, how they're going to respond to emotion, how they're going to respond to the delta. So you're a speaker in the final of worlds. Sorry, this house's debate in the final of worlds would fill a debate. On Gov, you probably want to argue that your only priority is having fun and having a good time at your at a world's final, whereas on Op, no, your desire is winning the game. Importantly here, if you can't think of any incentives for these actors, which is generally you're just not thinking hard enough. Generally speaking, it's like an actor probably has an incentive. The final thing you can get to is agency. When it comes to arguing about like let's say criminal advanced people or social movements or political parties, whatever, if you cannot think or the motion requires spec knowledge, which you don't have, generally speaking, the line you should go to is agency. Does the actor get more agency on our side, and then how do we prove this? Because I think it's very intuitive that people want more agency. I think it's very hard to say that people want less agency.
Yeah, no, I think this is a really good tip and is definitely something that you should remember, because we are going to be talking a lot about, as Cal says, things that require you to have a little bit of spec in order to determine what these desires and incentives are. This is definitely a really good tip to have in mind. And these are some kind of other common ones. I would say survival instinct kind of leads into that agency thing. In order to have agency, you have to kind of be alive. This is kind of similar again for control. You have to in order to have agency, you have to survive. In order to continue to exist, you have to survive. Most things generally like existing because otherwise they would probably stop existing under the status quo. If you're talking about individuals, connections and relationships are really good. Humans are inherently social animals. We gain joy from seeing other people engage and react to the things we do. Or we gain in the kind of negative evil sense, we gain pleasure from seeing people harmed by the awful things that a human might do. So people generally care about their relationality to other people, which makes it a kind of really useful kind of basis of if you have, this house as the president of a random country that you've never heard of. They probably do care about their family. They probably do care about their friends. You can say why emotion kind of affects them in a positive way. Likewise, again, for that, generally people want to be successful. People like feeling good about themselves. They like feeling that they're good at things. This is why Cal and I became training officers, because it tells us that we're good at things, even if we're actually not. This is like something that's kind of useful to you to think about, kind of why is this going to either allow someone to be successful or make them feel like they're successful. Controls Cal's kind of talked about, and then all of these just kind of link into people want to be seen positively. This is really useful if you're given an actor motion where one side of the debate is a moral action. So this house as president of the United States would save a drowning baby in a lake. You might say, well, the president of the United States is an immoral actor. But you can maybe say they would save the baby because people would think that they've done a good thing, and people want people to think that they are good and do good things. So that is just one way of kind of, if you're stuck with a moral action, because we're going to get into it a little bit for actor debates where moral actions or kind of moral justifications are a little bit harder to make just because of the way actor motions are adjudicated. This is kind of one way of kind of, if you have nothing, if you really don't know what that actor wants or what they're likely to do, this is something that you can take into consideration in the debate.
Yep, sure.
Cal?
So just in terms of when it comes to desires, you've got to remember that people don't just exist in a vacuum. Actors don't exist in a vacuum. They exist within structures that exist within societies. And those structures and societies are likely to influence what they want and how they want it. So incentive structures can take many different forms. So in terms of biological, I think there's a lot of analysis you can do on people wanting children, people wanting a family, people wanting like one partner to settle down. That's like ingrained into them biologically. Also, just like people want to be a good person because biologically they're programmed to do nice things and not evil things like kill people. There's also like social factors. So obviously Callum joked whether the example of removing someone as training officer would be a bit of a dick move and don't want to do that. I think most people want to be seen as nice, but I also think that depending on the social structures you live under or which affect the actor, those social incentives are likely to change. So, for example, we've had a motion about a debater and what their actors are. I think a debater's incentives, or social incentives, sorry, are probably different to someone who's in high school, because there's just different structures in those systems. Economic, I think this is relatively simple. I think if you're talking about like poorer people, the social structures are likely to be incentivizing them to like make more money or create a better wage or get a better job. Whereas at the higher ends of the economic spectrum, I think it's more about agency and having like, a cooler company or a cooler yacht and stuff like that. And it's just about they likely have different incentives because of the structures around them. And there's also like conscious and subconscious. So in terms of conscious, like, sure, I want to be a good person. I want to help people, but also subconsciously, I probably want to do things which are like, slightly less moral. I want to have lots of money. If you consider that immoral. But you've got to remember, just like at the basis or like the primary thing here is that incentive structures tell you what an actor is likely to desire because they exist and they signal what you should want. Note that like sometimes you can opt out of these, but it's generally recommended that you just kind of go, people want to make more money. I think it's unintuitive to argue people don't want to make more money if we're talking about like economic structures.
Yeah. Like you can opt out of them and you can also have overlapping ones. So there might be an economic incentive for you to make more money by doing, a lot of crime because maybe selling drugs or becoming a hired assassin might pay a lot of money to you. But you might then have the social incentive structure to say, well, I don't want to do crime. I don't want to go to prison. Being a paid hitman makes me feel bad because I don't want to kill people. So those are two incentive structures that can weigh on an individual based on the situation that they find themselves in. So you have those multiple ones, you have that degree of nuance of people being able to opt in, opt out. So this is kind of really the bread and butter of how you do actor analysis because it really tells you where to go. Always consider when you're prepping these things an actor's socioeconomic status. Actors who have what we would consider a higher socioeconomic status, i.e., that society views them as worth more because society places worth in terms of capital and in terms of like prestige, dictates both the incentives and the kind of things that they feel that they're supposed to do and the capacity to do those different things. Culture and geography make a difference. There is different social structures that exist in different cultural settings that make different actions more or less desirable. So you might live in France, which has the highest percentage of people having extramarital affairs. I would say that means that if that is your desire to do that, you probably have less of a social stigma to do it than if you live in a very monogamous UK, for example. Historical context and media environment, these are just how people kind of look back and see the kind of ways in which these are important for thinking, one, how is society built? So what kind of incentives are sort of baked into society? So the really simple example of this is because of a historical way most countries in the West have developed. We are capitalist societies where there is always an incentive to make more money because that is both how you survive and how you signal success because we value performance on the basis of money. And there is a media environment that exists where The news talks about businesses being really successful because they made a lot of money, where you see characters in TV shows desiring to make more money, and those who don't have money are generally stigmatized and seen as bad because they are usually characterized as unemployed, lazy people. This just creates an environment and a setting where people just want to make more money because the world around them tells them that's what they should go. So this is always your starting point. Figure out what your actor is, and then how these externalities are going to affect both their perspective and their incentive structure, because that's going to tell you the things they want. And when you know what they want and the world that they live in that constrains their options, that's going to tell you the things that they're going to do to achieve those.
Yeah, just to hop in quickly, a couple of things to consider. The first of which is remember and make sure that what you're saying is grounded in reality in terms of can you actually prove it? So I've been in a lot of rounds where emotion is something like this house as a parent, or this house as an immigrant, or this house as a student. And people immediately start dissecting and talking about, is the student a woman? Is the student gay? And you've got to remember that's fine, but it's probably unlikely that you're going to prove comparatively that someone is gay or is a woman. So you've got to remember when you're talking about this, that your incentive should apply to just the average person, regardless of their gender, their sexuality. And this obviously goes bigger as well. When you're talking about like companies, you don't try and prove a company is moral or immoral. If emotion doesn't say that, just be like, it is a company, it has incentives already. And the second thing is, and this becomes more important when we're talking about like historical debates or IR debates, is be able to prove what you are saying about the context of under which the actor exists, or at the very least, don't be too specky. Because sure, I think it's fine if you know a lot about a lot of different countries and a lot about treaties, on about the historical context these countries exist in. But if a judge doesn't buy it because you're just saying it, you're just asserting it, and you're not proving that Cuba feels X way about helping people in Africa, you're not proving that America feels X way about wanting to invade other countries, then your historical context is just going to fall into the debate. So it's just about, does the AIV know it? And if they don't know it, can I prove it? Because otherwise it's really hard to explain properly why you think this actor has this incentive.
Yeah, so let's look a little bit at this example. So let's assume for the sake of the example, motion is this house would create a wealth tax. So let's look at wealthy individuals who are an actor. They have, the money to make decisions, so they're able to do things. So under the status quo, they have an incentive to hoard wealth because they can hoard wealth. And because of all the analysis we said before, socioeconomic, cultural, media, they probably see the wealth that they have accumulated as a sign of success. But also, thinking back to what Cal said, wealth allows them to have agency. You can just default to that baseline. The more wealth you have in capitalist societies, the more capacity you have to take other actions. So you probably want to keep your wealth. So the debate is then about you remove a reward from the incentive structure. You're unable to hoard the same amount of wealth because you create this tax on the sheer amount of people. But people probably still want to be successful and they still want to have agency. So on Gov, you're probably going to argue that this creates an incentive to be perceived as good. So you're likely to do good things. People want to not be seen as criminals who aren't following the law and hiding all their money. So you're maybe going to pay your taxes, or you want to be seen as a really charitable individual so that people continue to laud you with success and allow you to do the things that you want to do. So you're maybe going to donate money to charity. But on op, you basically have to think about why the socioeconomic, the cultural factors, the media factors are so powerful and pervasive, and the incentives you're able to get from hoarding wealth are so great that you're always going to work to overcome. So you're going to take the action and spend lots more time and lots more money just so you don't have to pay this tax. And clearly that is two sides of the same coin. It's the same actor, and you have different structural reasons as to why the incentive structure changes. So this is why this is really powerful, because if you're on Gov and you're able to make all these structural reasons as to why there's now incentives to do good things, but on op, all they've just said is, oh, well, they can overcome it, but they don't explain the incentive structures as to why they're likely to overcome it. You're probably going to win that debate, right? Because you have done more nuanced analysis as to how the actor is actually going to respond to the changing circumstances around them. Cool. Morality and obligation, Cal.
Yeah, sure. So I think this is why I really like actor motions, because in most BP debates, you do this thing happens, and this is the best thing that can happen morally. And on their side, this thing happens, and this is the worst thing to ever happen, and it's a horrible idea, and I can't believe anyone would even defend it. But in actor motions, you can do this thing is moral, but it's still bad for the actor, or this thing is evil, but it's still really good for the actor, because a big mistake that people often make is arguing an actor should do something because it's morally correct or right. And actors are not immoral, but you do have to relate in the morality to what we've discussed already. It's also wrong to, on the other way, assert that they are moral. So an actor's sense of obligation and morality stems from like the socioeconomic factors, which we talked about earlier. It talks about the historical context, all that stuff we've already discussed. So actors want to probably be good, but we're going to disagree on what good means. And in the debate, you need to be able to prove what good means to your actor and whether or not they fulfill that better or not on your side. So in terms of like morality and obligation, the easiest one, which I always default to, is a parent probably has an obligation to their child because of just how we see parental structures in most cultures and societies around the world. But in a lot of cases, they don't have to buy specific types of shopping or use certain brands of products because sure, it's right, morally speaking, in terms of it's better for the environment. But if it's worse off for their child, then they're failing in their moral obligation, and therefore they shouldn't be doing that in the first place.
Yeah, the other good example is going vegan, which is that you might be able to say it is the morally correct choice to go vegan to undo animal suffering. But if you have an actor motion, this house as a regular person, from their perspective, one person going vegan isn't going to actually make a moral difference. There are social and cultural factors that say that this is the main way that you're able to get good proteins, and you have that survival instinct. If you're unable to afford good vegan food, and this is your core way of getting the kind of core balanced diet that you need to survive, it's probably going to be quite difficult for you to go vegan or not necessarily be the moral choice, even if that person necessarily wants to do good things. Going vegan is not necessarily the thing they see as being the thing that makes them good or is the good action to take. So, kind of the two examples that Cal and I've given can exemplify to you that just saying, this is a good thing, therefore the actor should do it, is not necessarily the way to go. So this is a third example as well. Democratic president would enact universal healthcare. You can also say as well that maybe they genuinely believe, this president believes, that it is bad people suffer. You cannot prove that beyond assertion. What you can prove is that it's a popular policy and would help get them re-elected. And presidents probably want to be re-elected because they care about things like their status, their power, their wealth. And these are things that are just easier to care about than saying that somebody probably believes this is a moral harm that people die from lack of healthcare. Like, this seems really intuitive to you because I assume that most of you probably don't want people to die from lack of healthcare. But like, given that there are American politicians who seem to be fine with this, you kind of need to assume that it's kind of a bit more difficult to prove that. And again, in a debate where one team tries to prove that and you try and prove the more structural reason, the kind of more self-interested reason, it's probably going to be more advantageous to you. Albeit, a kind of tip from me is I would always recommend when you're talking about things like politicians and kind of these kind of actors, if you can come up with the selfish and the selfless reason for why they're likely to do it based on incentive structures, that can be a pretty potent argument because it kind of defends you from both prongs of attack.
Sure. So I'll deal with this one. So earlier on during the game, when we were talking about like the way people vote, we do call it the rational choice game at Aberdeen because it refers to the rational choice model of voting. But it assumes that people are going to vote in what is their best interest and what they believe is their best interest, based on their own perspectives of the world, right? But you've got to remember that sometimes people don't act rationally, right? So you can actually successfully prove an argument in debate based on whether or not people are going to act rationally or not, or whether or not their perception is going to cause them to act rationally or not. So that may be the case that many actors are rational. That makes it difficult to prove certainty of actions during the debate. So again, this becomes really relevant in IR motions, where there's generally a really minor delta because of the way the international system works. What is the best way a country is going to act? It's sometimes not the most rational way it is going to act. So generally speaking, war is a bad thing and you shouldn't do war. But people still do war because, you know, we have irrational perspectives of what other countries want and irrational incentives and irrational perspectives of these incentives. So it's generally just remembering that sometimes your actors are going to be a bit silly and you have to account for that when you're doing your analysis.
So, I didn't actually write the summary slide. It's fun. This is kind of the end of the slides. Before we go into the kind of final game, just so that you guys can kind of try a little bit of what you've learned. I think the main thing to take away from this is what we started. The goal of this is not to necessarily give you everything you need to win an actor debate, because that's kind of impossible, because there's so many different examples of what an actor can be and the situation that you're going to find that actor in whenever you're given a motion. But the goal of this is hopefully to give you new strategies and new ways of thinking about how to approach actor debates and how to think about what is critical when you're dealing with an actor and building your analysis. So yeah, unless Cal has anything to add to the end of these slides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording because we're going to play one last game. And then we are going to do any last questions that you might have.